Welcome to the Flightcast, a place where opinions aren't right or wrong, and where we can agree or disagree about movies, TV, and other assorted media because it's all subjective. My name is Ray. Thank you so much for joining me on a Monday, a Marvel Monday, maybe a marvelous Monday for many of us who did partake in Thunderbolts over the weekend. But we've got a few things to discuss with respect to Marvel. Not bad things, just responses, just reactions, if you will, to stuff that I'm seeing on the internet. This is going to be another one of those episodes where I definitely have noted the passage of time. Because those of you that have listened to my show for the last number of years, you know exactly where my bias lies. You know exactly what my preference is when it comes to these shared cinematic universe comic book films. You know my heart lies with DC because Batman is my favorite superhero of all time, and he is a DC Comics character. You know I am a fervent defender of the DCEU. The whole reason the Flightcast exists is because of my fervent defense of Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice 9 years ago to morons in Facebook groups, so much to the point that I was so tired of sending them essays back and forth that I decided to make my own website to do exactly that. Right? You know how much of a DC fan I am, but you know that I am also a Marvel fan secondary, and even though I do enjoy the MCU, I've not always enjoyed the fan base, and I've thought, hey, you know what? I love Marvel movies, I enjoy them, but I'm tired of them being thrown in my face. This franchise doesn't need defending as long as people keep telling me it's the gold standard and DC could never, ever live up to that. Tired of that shit. And yet now, over the last year or so, right, and especially now, I've found myself coming to the defense of the Marvel Cinematic Universe time and time again. And I'm gonna do it again today. I'm going to do it again today. Not only against the trades, not only against reporters, but also against its own fandom. Yes, one more time, I shall come to the aid of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It is crazy how things change, right? It's amazing. We're still on the cusp of realizing a brand new DC Universe helmed by James Gunn. We're still a couple of months away from the release of Superman on July 11th. The official opening of the DCU, a brand new chapter to start for a DC Cinematic Universe, right? And because of that, the clickbait and the headlines had been few and far between because everybody's just on a holding pattern waiting to see exactly what this film is going to yield. That doesn't mean there's been no clickbait. That doesn't mean there's been no ridiculousness to this point, but it does mean there's been a lot less compared to what we've seen on the Marvel side. So while DC continues to enjoy its momentary hiatus at the moment, not in the spotlight until July 11th for certain, then we can go ahead and turn our full attention to Marvel Studios and the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I may say a thing or two that you don't agree with, especially with respect to a marketing decision that was literally just made today by Marvel Studios. But before diving into all of that, always want to remind everyone listening to this show that you can find it and my other shows at theflightcast.com or wherever you get your podcast. That includes Apple Podcasts, the Flightcast YouTube page, Spotify, and Pandora. You can find the Flightcast wherever you get your podcasts or at theflightcast.com. And you can find this show on Mondays. You can find Flightbox on Wednesdays after its hiatus. In fact, stay tuned. I want to say maybe next week at some point, either Wednesday or Thursday, probably Thursday more than likely. Actually, now that I think about it, definitively Thursday is when we'll have the recap episode of Andor with respect to Flightbox. So no episode of Flightbox this week, but definitely one next week for Thursday, and then we'll get back to our regular Wednesday schedule when we're dealing with a show that comes out weekly, or when I have a recap to do of a show that perhaps everybody else has watched that I'm getting caught up on with respect to that. But Flightbox, normally a Wednesday show, schedule is a little off until Andor Season 2 is completed, and then we've got the feedback show Friday, Flight every Friday. That is when you send in your emails and your post. The Friday deadline is 12 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, if you will, to send in your emails and your thoughts about movies, TV, and other sort of media. I imagine a number of you will have Thunderbolts thoughts, and we can have some spoiler-filled conversation with respect to that, and we'll probably even have some discussion about what's going on, about what I'm talking about in tonight's episode as well, among other things. But that is Friday Flight also. And then occasionally have episodes of Flight Review like the one that I just posted, the review of Thunderbolts yesterday, my thoughts, my spoiler-filled thoughts on the 36th Marvel Cinematic Universe film in all of its glory, and what I enjoyed about it, maybe what I didn't care for, but largely what I enjoyed about it, and also the emotional moment that I did have as a result of the film that was completely unexpected. Did not realize that was going to happen. But there's all of that. Plus, I want to take a moment to thank all of the supporters of patreon.com/theflycast. Hope that you're enjoying all the bonus content. I'm going to dive back into the Pixar well again, I think, this upcoming weekend for some new Patreon exclusive episodes of Flight Review, which means I'm going to have to break out some more of the, the eye wipers, if you will, because I know that it's going to get someone's going to be cutting onions, because that's what happens whenever a Pixar movie is viewed. There's always emotional moments. There's always a need for a tissue to the eyes, because it's they get you. They know how to tug on the heartstrings. They've been doing it for years. But there's that. Plus, there's also the animated franchise that I've been talking about for the last couple of weeks that I really want to start watching, because I've been collecting it for the library for the last year, and I finally want to dive into that. So stay tuned for that as well. Plus, other bonus episodes of Flight Review, Flight Box, and even Flight Report when I get back into comics. There's some comics reviews up there right now as well. My review of Civil War, my review of Spider-Man One More Day and Brand New Day. Like, there's different comics that I have read in the past that I have reviewed there, and once I figure out my Marvel Unlimited and DC Universe Unlimited, DC Universe Infinite particular subscriptions, then I'll get back into reading comics at some point and hopefully get some more episodes of Flight Report going in on the Patreon as well. But so far, hope that you're enjoying all the bonus content, and as always, cannot thank you enough for your support at patreon.com/theflightcast. All right, let's get into it, because we're talking Marvel Studios here, and a couple of days ago, that's where all this started, because I was scrolling threads and I saw a random post from one of the regurgitators that I've always had a tortured relationship with over the last number of years, with Culture Crave, Fandom Wire, whoever it is, right? In this case, it was Culture Crave, but a few other regurgitators that have popped up on threads in the last year or so were also pushing this headline that said Marvel Studios' Kevin Feige reportedly has 10-year plan for the X-Men in the MCU. And they were sourcing an article from the Wall Street Journal. And I said, oh, great. Okay, well, let's see where this goes. And I was curious about this article. And sure enough, I go to wallstreetjournal.com, and I need to point this out because this is important for clarification purposes. I go to Wall Street Journal, and I see the headline, Disney wanted more from Marvel. Now it wants less. The superhero studio is cutting back TV production and fixing its film slate after fans lost the plot. That's the headline and the subhead on the Wall Street Journal page. And I scroll down and I see an illustration by Eddie Guy of, like, battered and weather-beaten Marvel logo with Cap's shield and the gauntlet and Black Panther's helmet and Iron Man's helmet. It's like, okay, here we go. More of the dramatic pause. And then I see the author of the article, none other than our good toxic buddy Ben Fritz. Yes, Ben Fritz. That is a name that, again, Snyder fans, good and damn well who that fool is. But the problem is that as I go to read this article at the Wall Street Journal, what do I run into? I run into this. Oh, wait, I only see one sentence. The head of Marvel Studios told colleagues recently that watching all the comic book giants' new TV shows and films has started to feel more like homework than entertainment. The problem, Kevin Feige acknowledged, is that in an effort to satisfy parent company... Oh, wait, why is it grayed out? Why can't I see the rest? Oh, it says continue reading your article with a Wall Street Journal Plus subscription. Unlimited digital access across all platforms and devices. Oh, only $4 a week. No, screw you, Wall Street Journal. Yeah, I did that on purpose, guys, because I'm really sick of this paywall bullshit. This is unbelievable that journalism has taken this turn where, like, if you want to actually read real shit, they want to dime you. They want to nickel and dime you for whatever they can, because that's how, like, greedy and starved they are for attention. And don't give me this shit about how, well, it's tough times for publications. No, bullshit. They're all manipulation. Entertainment Weekly just posted another bullshit bigoted headline today about how Thunderbolts reigns on Sinner's Parade, overtaking the top spot at the weekend box office. That's lightly coded, actually not even so subtly coded bullshit bigotry right there. And they've learned nothing from Variety's bitch-ass mistake from 2 weeks ago. There was no reason whatsoever to use Thunderbolt to shade Sinners. Both movies had very good weekends. Sinners is still performing incredibly strong. It's made over $237 million worldwide, and in its third weekend, it's only experiencing a 28% drop-off. Shauna went and saw it for a second time, said their theater was still pretty full. This is on the third weekend, okay? Third weekend of it being released, so there was no need for that bullshit headline, and that's from a free publication, right? One that we're allowed to read, not behind a paywall from Entertainment Weekly. So I don't have any remorse. I don't feel bad for any of these publications, especially the ones behind the paywall, because if you want a free press and if you want people to actually read your shit, then hiding it behind a paywall is ridiculous. And then the only crap that we get to read that isn't behind a paywall is bigoted bullshit like that headline. And no, there's no defense for that headline, guys. I'm sorry. I'm not willing to necessarily have an argument about that one. There was no need to even if you're not being bigoted towards sinners, but unfortunately racism is a part of like everything that we do. Not to get too sociopolitical, but it is part of the fabric of the world that we live in. But even without that, there's no need to use one movie to shade another. I hate that. I despise tribalism. So no, absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, I went to go read this article from Mr. Ben Fritz, and I couldn't because I'm unwilling to pay the Wall Street Journal money. So what did I have to do? Well, I had to go over to Forbes because Paul Tassi, a senior contributor at Forbes, actually sourced the article and summed it up in a piece of his own titled "New Report Explains Why the MCU Has Mostly Fizzled Since Endgame." All right, I already hate this headline, but let's dive into what Mr. Tassi has to say. Now remember, he's breaking down the Ben Fritz piece that we can't read unless we pay Wall Street Journal money. Suck it, Wall Street Journal. Whatever. So, Paul says, Thunderbolts is currently on pace to be a big win for Marvel. Now, this was written on May 4th, so this is before it made $162.1 million. Actually, it was in the process of making that money in its opening weekend, right? He says it's currently on pace to be a big win for Marvel, its best critic scores in years, its best audience scores close to ever, and what looks like it's going to be a solid box office haul. Yeah, so far, so good. Solid box office haul, perhaps. He says that, of course, has been something of a rarity in the post-Endgame era with perilously few exceptions. Now, a new Wall Street Journal report dives into what apparently happened here, focused around the architect of the MCU, Kevin Feige. Among the highlights, he says, here we go, first highlight. It says Feige is very much aware about how many things have missed in phases 4 and 5. He says, I honestly couldn't even tell you when they switched over. And, well, I know, but whatever, Paul. They switched over in between Wakanda Forever and Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, but neither here nor there. He says, and is now trying to course correct. This is no doubt due to a string of high-profile misses from Eternals to Thor: Love and Thunder to Quantumania to the Marvels to some of the Disney Plus series like the comically expensive Secret Invasion. Okay, they're course correcting, all right. And he says this will include a new focus on quality in a way that may have lapsed over the years. The more grounded Thunderbolts is being held up as a good example of this and a good start. But this is, of course, as few months after the not-so-great Captain America Brave New World, which promised to take us back to the Winter Soldier spy days. It did not. No, it didn't, but whatever. It was still a solid movie. It's still in my mid-tier for my MCU rankings. But he says now the pressure is on Fantastic Four to deliver, and whatever is going to happen with the odd-sounding Avengers Doomsday. Odd-sounding? Okay, I don't know why. Why did you think Doomsday was only a DC villain? I don't know, Paul. Why does it sound odd? But whatever. Anyway, it says, next bullet point. The universe being so connected to Feige directly meant he was spread thin and unable to give his personal feedback on projects until it was too late to make changes, when previously he may have indeed been able to steer something in a better direction, as he had many times. That sounds like spin to me. Because I understand that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been a production-driven, like a producer-driven universe, and Feige has absolutely been at the helm of that. But this idea, and listen, that whole thing, I go all the way back to 4 or 5 years ago when James Gunn, let us into the room a little bit and admitted to us that, hey, the freedom that he experienced on the Suicide Squad was way different than what he experienced with Marvel because Kevin Feige would be in the edit room. Okay, so what? This is supposed to corroborate that and basically say, well, he wasn't able to give his personal feedback until it was too late. Well, what changed? How did he get spread so thin? Like, why did he go in a different direction? Why would he mess with the formula? If the formula was him micromanaging in the edit room, and if that was working, then why did he change that? I don't know. This one to me sounds like a bit of an excuse, because he's still in charge. So he didn't greenlight things. He didn't say things were okay. What do you mean until it was too late to make changes? Whatever. Either way, that's one of the other bullet points that Paul Tassi gleans from Mr. Fritz's article. Another one. He says Feige was originally against the idea of doing Disney Plus shows, but eventually saw potential there along with the move making Disney happy as it attempted to bolster signups. There have been wild swings in both quality, budget, and reception, and things do not appear to have stabilized yet, despite some recent wins mainly focused on cheaper shows. So my issue with that is I don't think that Disney Plus should be ignored, okay? And I don't just say that because of the hits that they've had, whether it's WandaVision or I think both seasons of Loki have been a hit for them, right? Obviously, people thoroughly enjoyed Daredevil Born Again and can't wait for season 2 of that, right? Now that Daredevil and that the Marvel Netflix universe is part of the MCU proper at this point, right? So it's not just because of those hits, but it's also because I recognize that television is an important part of storytelling and building out the Marvel Cinematic Universe in this regard, because streaming is important, right? That is part of the business aspect of this, and you can't just ignore that, right? We wanted, myself, Brent, my former podcast co-host over at Squadcast Media, when we did Fans Without Borders, we wanted Marvel Netflix connected. We wanted there to be a copacetic relationship between the two, and there never fully was until now. But now that we have it, you shouldn't just toss it aside, and you shouldn't just say, well, we're not going to do projects for that. No, your franchise is big enough, especially after 17 plus years, that you can expand into television and flesh out some more stories the way that you could have beforehand, when you were in broadcast TV. But now you certainly can, now that you have a streamer of your own, you're not having to worry about pawning everything onto Netflix in that regard. So, I don't really, I still see the potential there, is what I'm saying. And as far as wild swings and quality, budget, and reception, okay, swings in budget and reception, sure, but quality is subjective. And look, do I largely agree with people that Secret Invasion was not what we all were hoping for? Yeah, I do agree with that, but I still found a way to enjoy it. I didn't light it on fire. I didn't act like, oh my goodness, this is the worst television show I've ever seen. But fans are so fickle, and people are so quick to extremes with respect to that, right? And all the shows that Marvel has done to this point, why are they not allowed to have a couple that are like, well, okay, this didn't quite pan out the way that we did? I mean, that happens in television all the time, but it's like there's so much of an expectation. And this is where the gold standard stuff becomes a problem, because you keep holding Marvel up to this standard and you think they're going to have it forever. So when they actually don't necessarily do that, subjectively speaking, you act like, oh, the franchise is dead. The franchise is dying. No, it's not. They just happened to do a project that you didn't care for. That's what should happen over 17 plus years. You shouldn't necessarily enjoy all of it unless you're somebody that actually wants to enjoy all of it, because that is a conscious choice that you're making. And if you want to enjoy all of it, you can. Do I necessarily want to enjoy all of it? Not in its entirety, but I have found positives that I can enjoy out of the two Marvel movies that I really don't care for, Guardians Volume 2 and Thor Love and Thunder. I have found positives, and I've talked about those positives before. But I'm able to do that, just like I'm able to find positives in something like Secret Invasion. A lot of fans, subjectively speaking, are too miserable to do that, and they would rather wallow in their misery and stay miserable than actually try and find a silver lining with whatever it is that they like. And they whine and complain and bitch about it all the time on social media. But whatever, as far as stabilization, I don't know what they're looking for as far as stabilization. They've had hits. WandaVision worked. Loki worked. Daredevil Born Again clearly has worked. And then if we want to really get into debates, I would say Moon Knight worked. I would say The Falcon and the Winter Soldier worked. I know there are people that are critical of both shows. I enjoyed both of them, truthfully. And I enjoyed Hawkeye for what it was that I was watching. I still need to watch Echo, She-Hulk, and I'm sure there's one more in there that I'm forgetting. But either way, that's highly subjective as far as stabilization is concerned. To me, stabilization is, are you putting out new shows? Are you expanding the universe? Are you adding new options for content for us to watch within this universe? If the answer is yes, then to me, that feels like stabilization. But I don't know. I mean, they have all kinds of metrics and whatnot that they look at themselves, because we're still in the self-reporting era of streamers and whatnot. But either way, let's continue with the rest of Mr. Tassie's breakdown here. His next bullet point says that Feige reportedly, here we get to the crux of the headline, Feige reportedly has a decade-long plan for the X-Men in place after a decade and a half of mainly focusing on the Avengers and related characters. Not to say those will all go away, he says, but it would make sense to fully dive into these new characters it has finally gotten its hands on. though questions are raised about what's exactly about to happen with a bunch of Fox-era X-Men coming to Avengers Doomsday in some multiverse party, where presumably the all over 50 actors are about to be recast with younger variants shortly thereafter. Though it certainly seems like they want at least one to carry over, he says. Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. Jackman has not been confirmed to be appearing in Doomsday, however, despite a lot of his old X-Men cronies showing up. Okay, so obviously this is the one the part of it that interests me the most, because a decade-long plan for the X-Men. All right, I hear you, Kevin Feige. If that is true, if that is where this report that Tassie is sourcing from Fritz at Wall Street Journal is coming from, cool. I like that idea, because that was my idea in the first place, right? I still feel like the reason Doomsday and Secret Wars and RDJ coming back as Doom and all that, I still feel like this is a lot of getting the band back together, because we want to get back to the pre-2020 numbers, the pre-2020 critical acclaim and Rotten Tomatoes scores. We want to dominate again, and I feel like they're just Iger and those board members are just telling Feige, bring everybody back. Bring back the nostalgia. Make big team-ups. Make huge event films. That's what'll get us going after we pissed everything away with the strikes last year. Yeah, the strikes were your fault. The strikes were the studio's fault. I will continue to die on that hill, if you will, although I really don't think I'm dying on that hill. I think I'm living on that particular hill, because all these studios are still, like, hemorrhaging money and still trying to dig their way out of the absolute arrogant greed and stupidity that they exhibited last year with the writers and the actor strikes. It was stupid, and they're still paying for that. And they expect us to fit the bill for that. There are a lot of people these days in the one percenter positions that expect us to fit the bill for everything as working class individuals. It's bullshit, but whatever. This idea of a decade-long plan for the X-Men, yes, absolutely. You know what? Look, this whole getting the band back together thing with Doomsday and Secret Wars, fine. Go ahead and do it. See if you can make all the big money for the next couple of years with that. All right, cool. But after that, dive into this 10-year plan with the X-Men and make them uncanny. Give me my uncanny X-Men, please. I've mentioned this before, right? Spider-Man might be my favorite character as far as Marvel heroes are concerned, but the X-Men are my favorite group. They are. And you know what? I'm going to see Fantastic Four First Steps, obviously. I'm probably going to enjoy it. But while Phil and many others, they have been eagerly anticipating the MCU's version of the Fantastic Four and have been waiting for them to finally become part of this and see them adapted further in a form that more than likely is going to be better than any of the previous incarnations that we've seen, subjectively speaking. I have been sitting here waiting on when I'm going to see the next incarnation of Charles Xavier, the next incarnation of Eric Lenscher, the next incarnation of Scott Summers and Aurora Monroe, and all of my uncanny X-Men that I loved so dearly in the Fox X-Men universe. I want to see them brought into the MCU proper. That is what I am waiting on. And so when I hear decade-long plan, excellent. Get that going. Seriously, Kevin Feige, get it going, right? And if it means that you got to do your whole micromanaging thing, look, however I feel about producers and especially studio heads micromanaging their filmmakers in the edit room with respect to what they're doing on their creative art, however I feel about it, you have made that work. As far as Marvel Studios is concerned, you and your council and everybody at Marvel Studios has made that work within the MCU, and you've made a lot of filmmakers, including Ryan Coogler, very successful. You've helped them succeed over the last 17 years, right? It's amazing that the MCU has been around for that long, and you put out 36 films in that time. And it doesn't matter whether all of them were hits or not. Most of them have been hits. I don't give a shit how many of them haven't been hits in phase 4 and 5 or not, and I'll get to that in a little bit as well. But either way, just if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Whatever your system is, however you have decided to orchestrate things, whatever you were doing beforehand, Kevin Feige, go ahead, go back to it. And Paul Tassie's conclusion here, he says the overall idea appears to be make less stuff, but make better stuff. Subjective, of course. But he says that seems wise. But I think we're still, this is him talking, he says, I think we're still in a questionable era at the moment. Thunderbolts and Daredevil Born Again aside, and we may have to get through a bunch of mucky productions before this full reset happens. And the thing I'm worried about the most right now, he says, is Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars. because he says there may be too much pressure on Feige after 15 years of this. Not to say that he should move on, but the idea to slow things down and not relentlessly launch a half dozen movies and shows a year regardless of quality is a good one. There are very big tests ahead, and this may take a while to kick into gear, Tassi says. Even if Thunderbolts has been good here, though so far not a huge earner, we may be waiting a few years for this reset to happen. Yeah, but again, I still feel like Paul Tassi and everybody else, I still feel like that pressure is coming from Feige's bosses. I don't know that Kevin Feige's idea was to get the band back together. Maybe it was his idea. Maybe he is the one that spearheaded that. But I just envision very easily a board full, like a room full of Marvel executives and Disney executives just saying, go back to what made us $2 billion a movie. Like, that's just the easiest flippin' thing to do, right? And yeah, there probably is a ton of pressure on Feige, but quite honestly, I don't see why they shouldn't give him the benefit of the doubt. 17 years of this, and he has largely massively succeeded to the tune of billions for Disney, to the billions of Marvel Studios. Why they wouldn't put their trust in him just because of, some reported, some subjective clunkers here with respect to phase 4 and 5, right? All the post-Infinity Saga stuff, which again, so much of that subjective determination and a lot of it really comes down to fans and their own personal expectations not necessarily being level set post-Infinity Saga, right? I do feel like a lot of it is that, but there is something to be said with respect to how the general audience has responded to it. It really, as I've said before, the biggest thing was the frequency. The fact that they were making too many movies and too many shows a year. That's where the quote-unquote superhero fatigue comes from. Not that they're tired of superhero films, but that there are too many for them to make a choice. They're only picking a couple to watch, and it's only going to get worse as financial situations, especially in the United States of America and even worldwide, start to get even more constricted for the working class. You're going to have a lot of people that are going to be budgeting things a lot more differently. And don't get me started on this bullshit with the Hollywood tariffs. I don't want to get into that. I don't. I know you guys have read it. I don't want to get into that dumb distraction that was just announced yesterday by the current administration. I'm not going to get into it unless somebody wants to talk about it. If you guys want to talk about it on Friday Flight, we'll talk about it. But that's just another reason why things are potentially going to get more difficult for the general audience as far as seeing movies, and another reason why neither Marvel nor DC should be flooding the marketplace with a bunch of them every year. There's only so much money that the general audience has to spend in disposable income to buy movie tickets and to go see these films. So if you want to make less and focus more on big event films, yes, I do agree with that in that regard. And if that helps the subjective quality of what you're doing, okay, cool. I didn't think the subjective quality of what a lot of what you were doing had really gone downhill that much with respect to the phase 4 and phase 5 films, but that's just my own subjective opinion with respect to that. But if you're talking about frequency, if you're talking about giving the general audience less opportunities to say, hey, let me blow this movie off, let me blow that movie off, let me go to the one movie, let me pick one out of these 4 Marvel movies this year that I really want to see, so that they go see. And this year, they didn't necessarily scale down a whole lot because Brave New World was out in February, Thunderbolts is out now, and then you've got Fantastic Four First Steps in July, and it would not surprise me if out of all these 3 movies, right, Brave New World, kind of underperformed, Thunderbolts had a good opening weekend, but not a big opening weekend, certainly not one of the biggest in the phase 4 and 5 eras. But it would not surprise me one bit if that general audience is just waiting for July 25th. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Fantastic Four is what they have decided that's what we're going to go see. Would not surprise me at all. Whether they like the retro trailer or not, the Fantastic Four is something that the general audience identifies with and knows, not even from the comics, but just from the previous cinematic incarnations that we've had, right? And so that could be something that sticks in their head more than a Captain America movie without Steve Rogers, no disrespect to Sam Wilson and Anthony Mackie intended whatsoever, or a Thunderbolts film with a bunch of other characters, from different Marvel projects at this point that I, of course, enjoyed. I enjoyed both of those movies, but just looking at how the general audience could potentially look at this. So it wouldn't surprise me one bit if they're waiting for Fantastic Four before they go and spend their money, right? And so that's the point here. So that's where I do agree with Tassi and what's going on here is scale the projects back, so the general audience doesn't have to make as many difficult choices in terms of what they're going to watch and what they're not going to watch, right? And I say that for Marvel and I say that for DC. So those apparently were all the bullet points from the Ben Fritz piece that, couldn't read because Wall Street Journal wants to be greedy bastards about it. So, yeah, intriguing. Again, we're in this period where, the Marvel Studios is under scrutiny, and it's a weird place to be, and it is. It's still a weird place to be in as a DC fan primarily, looking at all the pressure and all the scrutiny that the DCEU was under and DC Films was under, and now, I mean, the script is flipped. It really has. I mean, we've all got our cautious optimism on for Superman, but there are plenty of people that are hyped for Superman, plenty of fans that are hyped for Superman, hyped for a new Superman film, a new Superman, movie, new Superman like portrayal to finally hit the big screen, right? So we're in that holding pattern, and right now Marvel is just here. Let's get out the notepad. Let's take notes. Let's say, hey, did they do this? Did they do that? What happened here? What happened there? It's an interesting reversal, seriously, and I know many of you feel the same way. We've talked about it before on social media and on Friday Flights. So yeah, it's interesting to see exactly where Marvel's going to go and what direction they're going to take and how they are going to course correct based on what has worked or what they think has worked and what hasn't necessarily in phases 4 and 5. And honestly, that gets into my own personal thoughts with respect to Marvel Studios marketing and the MCU approach in general. Because I've made no bones about this, guys. I am a Marvel fan. I've seen all 36 of their films all 36 MCU films, that is, in theaters. And with respect to these phases, Thunderbolts, according to this list, ends phase 5, right? Like, that's it. So phase 5 is done, right? So, when talking about, when I hear this phrase on social media about how, because Thunderbolts was critically received well, certified fresh on the hell site known as Rotten Tomatoes, and has that opening weekend, and you hear so many people talk positively about it, and you hear the sentiment of Marvel is back. Marvel has finally returned to glory, right? And then you get all the defensive MCU fans who are like, well, Marvel's never left. Marvel's always been here. Marvel hasn't gone anywhere. You're just fickle. And for once, it's like, okay, now you guys are speaking my language. Now you guys understand, what it means to not be the gold standard, right? You understand what it means now for your own fans to question things and be like, oh my goodness, when is the glory going to get back in our franchise? Now you're finally dealing with it. You guys have been riding high for so long, right? And then it's like, it seems as soon as the Infinity Saga ended, and then bolstered by, the disastrous 2020 that we all experienced as a species, humanity, right? With respect to what happened that year, right? Bolstered by all of that, now we're talking about the MCU being in a critical phase, right? A more criticized phase than it ever has been with both these last two phases, right? But for me, pound for pound, I agree with the people that say Marvel has never left, because for me personally, Marvel has never left. And a lot of phase 4, like this is where the scoreboard mentality stuff really, rears its ugly head, because you have a lot of people that weigh the success of this franchise based solely on what it does at the box office. And in many cases, that is not a fair assessment with respect to any of these films, because number one, you have to take 2020 into account. You have to. You have to take that into account. You cannot just say, you can't apply the same like standards and the same like, benchmarks that may have been set prior to 2020 to anything after 2020. It is not fair. It is bad faith. It is. It's a bad faith argument. Not only because of the pandemic, not only because of what happened in 2020 and all of the, the schedules getting pushed a year and a half down the road, but also because of what the studios did with the strikes last year. Now, look, you can call that an own goal, and you can say that it's Disney's own fault, and you can say that it's all these other studios' own fault. Yeah, of course, you most certainly can do that. But when it comes to the creatives, when it comes to the actual work, right? When we talk about these directors, we talk about these, cast and crew and these filmmakers, right? They can't be blamed for that necessarily. They're under the gun, and they're still trying to tell their stories in that regard. And for me, I just feel like a lot of fans, did not level set properly. And it's interesting because when I look at phase 4 and I see, okay, those first 3 movies right now, remember, and I brought this up when this happened, when it was like Marvel is releasing 4 movies in 6 months. From July 9th to December 17th, they released 4 movies in 2021. Black Widow, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, Eternals, and Spider-Man No Way Home. And when I watched all four of those films at different theaters here in Michigan, I was masked for all of them, and none of them were full capacity. None of them. Absolutely none of them, except maybe Spider-Man No Way Home. And even then, when I went and saw that opening weekend, that was when like the Delta variant or something of COVID came out and freaked everybody out again with respect to going to movie theaters. Okay, so that plays a part. And I realize that Spider-Man No Way Home made $1.9 billion. I get that. But remember what I said about how the audience only has so much, the general audience only has so much disposable income to see in these movies. And that particular year, in addition to dealing with movie theaters that weren't fully open the whole year, in addition to dealing with the fear and the threat of COVID-19 and having to mask up and go into these places, right, and deal with other people, you also had four movies in a 6-month period that they had to decide whether or not they were going to go see. And never mind the whole disaster of Disney Plus Premier Access with Black Widow that led to that, the brief lawsuit and all that. Never mind all that. That affected that film. And then you talk about Shang-Chi and Eternals. Of course, those were affected, right? Especially since Eternals was only, a month and a half before Spider-Man No Way Home. It was clear that the general audience saved their money, saved their ducats for Spider-Man No Way Home. Clearly they did. The proof is in the pudding. They most certainly did. And then, on the strength of that, after that, they transferred that over monetarily to Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. And that's where we got everybody with all these outlandish expectations like, oh, Tom Cruise is going to play a variant of Tony Stark. Oh, my goodness. All this other ridiculousness. But still, that's why that movie made over $900 million, right? That's how much it made, isn't it? That was a big success. Yeah, $955.8 million, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. Yes. That was a rousing success, post 2020, if you will, right? And then it did not carry over into Thor: Love and Thunder. It did not. Thor: Love and Thunder made about 300 million less than that, right? Well, okay, 760.9 million, so 200 plus million less than that, or whatever. It's still not a bomb necessarily. However, $250 million budget for that movie. Wow, that's crazy. But either way, right? So that wasn't necessarily that stumbled a little bit, right? And then you come back with Black Panther: Wakanda Forever in November, and that's the 2 hours and 41 minutes of saying goodbye to Chadwick Boseman. May he rest in peace. That makes 859.2 million, right? That's on Ryan Coogler's ledger with respect to his success as a director, right? And never mind all the people that hate that movie, never mind all the people that are upset about T'Challa not being recast. That was a success for that, right? So that was a case where you had people like, okay, 3 movies, but they were spread out, right? May, July, November, and not only that, Doctor Strange and Wakanda Forever were both sequels to solo films that had done well prior. Yes, I know Thor was also a sequel, but still, it was the 4th Thor movie, right? Not the 2nd with respect to Doctor Strange and Black Panther, and they were spread out more equidistantly, right? Like there's more distance between like May and July or May and November than there is between May and July or July and November in that regard. But either way, like, so all of that success, phase 4 honestly did pretty well, right? Because if you take the money from Multiverse of Madness and Wakanda Forever, and just chalk up 2021, chalk up the pandemic to Shang-Chi and Black Widow and Eternals, like, and you had a nearly $2 billion earner in No Way Home. So where were you in a bad place? Where was the MCU in a bad place financially? I don't see where. And they were still getting strong critical reviews with the exception of Eternals. Eternals was their first rotten review, from the Hell site. Then their second one, if I remember correctly, was Ant-Man and the Wasp. Okay, so that one did not do all that well. That started phase 5. Okay, so the issues that people are probably having with respect to it start with phase 5, right? Okay, well, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania didn't do all that well. But Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 did, right? 845.6 million, nothing to sneeze at. I'm getting these numbers from the wiki, right? So, I mean, that succeeded. And then the Marvels did not succeed. Now, that's 3 movies, and yes, that's the spacing again, like I talked about before, but Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, did not have that buzz, did not generate it. The Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 did generate that buzz. People did, were anticipating that. And then for whatever reason, the Marvels just did not capitalize, did not pull in, enough of the Ms. Marvel crowd or enough of the Captain Marvel crowd from 2019 that just unfortunately did not work for them financially. Okay, so what, we're going to freak out over that? No, you shouldn't freak out over that because next you got Deadpool and Wolverine. And that's what? Your $1.3 billion earner in Phase 5? Okay, so as far as I can tell, every single phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe has had at least one film that has grossed over $1 billion. All right. And in this case, between Deadpool and Wolverine and Guardians Volume 3, you're over $2 billion just on two movies, right? So you can't stomach, Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, the Marvels, Brave New World, and Thunderbolts. Thunderbolts just came out, right? So Thunderbolts is still, jury's still out on that one. But you're not you can't stomach the idea of like three of your other movies being or having a bomb. I mean, come on, seriously, 17 years in, 36 movies in, and you really thought that everything should succeed. The Marvels, what was the Marvels final gross? The Marvels final gross was 206.1 million. Okay, that is less than what was the previous lowest grossing MCU film, which I'm pretty sure was The Incredible Hulk all the way back in Phase 1. That film made 265.6 million. Wow, I thought it was 237. Whatever, okay. So that's what the Wikipedia is saying. Okay, so The Marvels is the lowest grossing MCU film in history. Okay, but is it really indicative of a trend? Is it really? Is it really like this? Oh, well, Marvel's lost its touch. The MCU is no longer what we thought. No, because, again, right after the Marvels, y'all turned out in droves for Deadpool and Wolverine, and so the general audience. So what are we talking about here? This whole idea that the MCU is back. The MCU really did never leave. The MCU really has been here this entire time. They just haven't hit as much as they were when they were hitting all the time. But you can't expect a franchise that has been around for this long to hit all the time, whether it's critically or whether it's box office. And if people would just stop being miserable bitches about it and just level set their expectations and say, okay, you know what? Maybe I didn't care for Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. Maybe I didn't care for the Marvels, but I still enjoyed Guardians Volume 3, and I certainly enjoyed Deadpool and Wolverine because all those cameos were awesome. And now I'm enjoying Thunderbolts, even though I didn't necessarily care for Brave New World. Like, whatever it is, okay? Or maybe you had a meh reaction to Brave New World. Whatever it is, level set, for crying out loud. Instead of this whole narrative of Marvel is back. Marvel never left. Marvel Cinematic Universe has always been around. Marvel Studios has always been around. It has never left. You have just changed. And that's another thing that people, the defensive MCU fans have been bringing up is how much we have changed and aged as an audience. So our sensibilities and our perceptions are very different with respect to how we felt when this franchise started and how we feel as people now. And that's it is very different. We don't watch these films the same way as we used to when we were younger. We don't. We have a different perspective on a number of things in that regard. And my perspective is I like being happy and I don't like bitching about shit. I really don't. At least as far as movies are concerned. I'll bitch about fandoms and humans being stupid with respect to the outside and the inside baseball, this stuff. Yeah, I'll talk about that. I'll absolutely have some emotions and some stress, if you will, at least on these airwaves about that. But as far as the films themselves, I am there to say, prove to me that you're bad. And so far, as far as the MCU is concerned, the only ones that have really come close to proving to me that they're bad are Guardians Volume 2 and Thor Love and Thunder. And I still don't think that they're bad now. I just think that they are like the least in that regard. It's like, can I find things that I enjoy? Yes, because again, I like being happy at this point in my life. A whole lot of people don't necessarily like being happy. And with respect to people not being happy, this leads us to our last little bit of business with respect to Marvel, which is the marketing decision that they made today that a decent amount of Marvel fans, at least on social media, are not happy about. And it's a very unique situation. There is, I suppose, a spoiler that has been officially dropped from Marvel Studios with respect to Thunderbolts. Now, I am not going to say exactly what it is. I'm not going to spoil it here on this show. However, I will say that I do not agree that it is such a spoiler that people should be this up in arms about. I don't. Anthony, you may disagree with me on this. I know that you saw it. You probably you saw it and you posted about it on Threads, and I said get off of social media. Here's the thing. There are different variations of spoilers, okay? The spoiler that I'm certain you saw, the one that was shown officially by Marvel Studios today and by the actual actors in Thunderbolts today, is not a plot-centric spoiler. It's not. There is nothing about the movie itself that ruins, like as far as the actual progression of the film. The only thing it ruins is the reveal of that title. That is it. That's the only thing that it ruins, right? And to me, that's not a, I my entire movie going experience of Thunderbolts would not have been destroyed if I knew that that was going to happen. Because my brain, if I had found out, like, say I hadn't seen Thunderbolts on Friday, right? Say I had not seen it opening weekend before they made this reveal, right? And let's say that, I waited until tomorrow, like Anthony's about to do, right? And I saw it then, but I knew what the spoiler was, right? Well, my brain, after seeing that, will go, well, I wonder why that happened. I wonder why they're doing that. And so my brain would seek an answer for that question, and then I'd get to that point in the movie like, oh, okay, all right, now I get it in that regard. So that's why, to me, this isn't necessarily a spoiler to shake my fist at a cloud about, because I look at it and go, well, the movie still has to answer that question for you. You're still not going to know why that occurred unless you see the movie. And again, the plot line of the movie, the character developments in the movie are not ruined whatsoever by that particular reveal. This is a marketing stunt. And quite honestly, I don't think it's a bad marketing stunt for Marvel. I really don't. And I know a lot of people on social media, and maybe even a number of you would disagree with me on that. But let's think about this for a second here. Let's put ourselves in the perspectives of the general audience yet again. Remember that the general audience probably has not seen all of the things that the Thunderbolts were in, right? Do we know for certain that they saw Black Widow? We don't. Especially what I said earlier in terms of 2020 and 2021 and the compressed schedule and the pandemic. And what did I say? They saved their ducats more than likely to go see No Way Home at the end of the year, which means that they blew off Black Widow, Shang-Chi, and Eternals largely in that regard, right? So maybe we can't guarantee they've seen Black Widow. And if they haven't seen Black Widow, then we don't know that they're even aware of Yelena or her father Alexei in that, or Taskmaster in that regard. We don't know that they know anything about those three. We also can't guarantee that they've seen The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, because we don't know how much Marvel television they've even watched as a general audience. And The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I don't think had the numbers. I don't think Disney reported the stronger numbers that they did, like with WandaVision and with Daredevil Born Again, that they've reported, like for those shows, right? Like I don't know. So we can't assume that the general audience has seen that. We can't assume they've seen Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, because that was that was the movie right after Infinity War. And how do we know that the general audience didn't just wait for Endgame to come out because they wanted to see how it ended, right? It wasn't like Quantumania, or not Quantumania, Ant-Man and the Wasp, the second film. It wasn't like the second film, did terrible money, but it certainly didn't do Avengers money in that regard. Not that it should have, but either way, the fact of the matter is we can't assume that the general audience has seen all of the projects that the Thunderbolts team comes from. We also don't know if they're even aware that Julia Louis-Dreyfus has been in the franchise up to this point. So the idea is, okay, this is a new group. This is a largely new group, a largely new like superhero team-up group for the general audience. And you've been teasing this whole thing with the asterisk like the entire time. And all right, can we draw them in? How many of them can we draw in for opening weekend for this big twist? And then from that point on, after the opening weekend twist, for anybody in the general audience that was on the fence, and now they're hearing better word of mouth, now they're hearing people say, oh, great movie, this and that, whatever. Now you drop this bomb on them marketing wise, and then they see it and they go, oh, really? I will be curious to see this week if the change, if you will, and again, I'm not going to say what it is, because those of you that don't know what it is, if you haven't seen Thunderbolts yet and you're not aware of what this is, I'm not going to say it aloud, because it is technically a spoiler. It's just not one that I think fans should be freaking the hell out over, because the general audience will look at that poster and go, oh, really? Okay, and I'm very curious to see how many of them turn out in that second weekend. I want to see what the drop-off is. If the drop-off is still massive, if it's still like, traditional, like 40, 50, 60%, well, then clearly it did nothing, right? It didn't do anything to stave off or bring anybody else from the general audience out to the theater to keep bolstering the numbers for the movie, right? But I went to go look at the official listings on Fandango and some of the other websites for the theaters to see if they had actually changed the listing. They have not. The listing still says what it originally said, right? Like what it's supposed to say in that regard, in terms of how things are listed. But that other piece of like marketing, if you will, that is now all over the place, especially if you go on social media, right? Like that's not necessarily how it's officially listed, like in these where they're at. So that may cause confusion. I don't know. Now that could be a point of contention. It's like, wait a minute, are you confusing the general audience with respect to what it is that they're going to go see? Maybe, I don't know, perhaps, but either way, right? I think this is a stunt, and maybe it's a bit of a shot in the dark for Marvel. But hey, you know what? I think it's intriguing, and yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I do feel differently about it because I saw the movie already. I do, and the thing is, again, from the general audience standpoint, this isn't gonna bother them. This is not. This doesn't bother the general audience like that. They're not gonna look at that and go, "Oh wow, what a massive spoiler." No, they're not nearly as freaked out or as upset as any of you might be as a result of this. We're the ones that are upset because we're the ones that really want to stay in the dark. We're the ones that truly want to be surprised because we're the ones that are that much more heavily emotionally invested in this franchise. And we don't want any spoilers of any kind, whether it is big, little, small, insignificant, or otherwise, right? We don't want any of that, right? We want to go in as blind as we possibly can be with respect to knowing anything, right? And so when we're not, when we feel like we've been robbed of that, that's when we get pissed off. But the general audience doesn't care. They do not care. And it will be intriguing. They're not going to care about this new piece of marketing. But what I am curious is whether or not they will care enough about the marketing. Like, they're not going to care about it being a spoiler, but they are going to care. I'm curious to see how much they care about it drawing them in. Like, is it going to be a draw? Is it going to do what I think Marvel Studios is hoping that it does in terms of a second and maybe a third weekend and potentially other word of mouth? I don't know. I'm not sure. They're taking a bit of a shot with this. They are. And it's a bit of a risk, but I'm intrigued to see where it goes. But I don't think that doing this will affect them either way. I think either it's going to work or it's not going to work. And if it doesn't work, I don't think that if they hadn't done it, it would have. I don't think that would have changed anything. I don't think that would have been like, oh, well, the whole reason that people didn't go see it is because that was spoiled for them. No, I don't buy that shit for a second. I don't. If it has the normal second week drop off that these films normally have, I'm not going to attribute it to that. No, I'm not going to blame it on that. And I can already see people already saying that foolishness on social media. No, I don't believe that is going to cause the general audience to say, I don't need to see that because I'm tired of da da da. No, I don't. I don't think that's the case at all. I really don't. Especially not with respect to the future, the immediate future plans of the MCU going forward. So those are my thoughts with respect to that. And again, this is me largely defending Marvel Studios and the MCU as far as phases 4 and 5, as far as this course correction and what they're supposed to be doing for the future, according to Ben Fritz, as told to us by Paul Tassi, who actually allowed us to read his article without having to spend extra money, to read Forbes. Thank you, Paul Tassi and Forbes, for still making your publications available to the working class without having to try and bleed us for money behind a damn paywall. And then my thoughts on this marketing stunt. Yeah, it's a marketing stunt. I get it. You're probably pissed if you didn't see the movie already that you know about that, but you're in the minority. As we all are as fans, we are in the minority. Again, we do not make these movies billions. We don't. The general audience does. We make these movies money, but not enough to push it into the billions like that. They are the draw. They are the main event with respect to that. And the question will be whether or not that many of them turn out to see the movie in its second weekend because of that new piece of marketing or not. Remains to be seen. We'll find out this upcoming weekend. But I think that'll do it for this particular episode of the Flightcast. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for supporting the Flightcast. If you have any thoughts with respect to this, of course, I've talked about how Thunderbolts is fair game for spoiler conversation on Friday Flight. We can absolutely talk about that movie. But if you have any thoughts with respect to what I've laid out here with these bullet points on the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, this alleged 10-year plan for the X-Men and what they're going to do to course correct in the wake of disappointments in phase 4 and 5. If you have thoughts on that, if you think Marvel did go away and actually has returned, or if you're like me and you think Marvel has never left, subjectively speaking, and people need to start level setting a lot better as far as fans are concerned, and your thoughts on this particular piece of marketing for Thunderbolts, right? We can talk spoilers on that as well, because I feel like by Friday, most of you will have seen the movie. I know a number of you already have. I think Anthony and maybe one or two others haven't seen it yet. But we can get all into that. We can have spoiler-filled conversations with respect to all of that and anything else with respect to movies, TV, and other assorted media this week on Friday Flight. You know where to find me on Instagram and Threads at the Flightcast, at BLUESKY at the Flightcast, or at BLUESKY at Flightcast, pardon me, just Flightcast over on BLUESKY. There's also the Flightcast YouTube page. You can comment on the posting underneath this particular episode. There's the Flightcast Facebook page, and of course that can be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. All right, take care. Stay safe out there. If you haven't seen Thunderbolts yet, go see it. Hope you enjoy it. Or go see Sinners, because that's still doing well too. Hope you enjoy that as well. Have a great week, and I will see you all next time. Take it easy.